Good afternoon and welcome to the state agency's training on formal and equipment procurement. During the training, if you have any questions, please use the chat feature and we will try to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Before you select a method of procurement, you must conduct a cost analysis. The cost analysis is so that we can determine which procurement method you have to use and to select the contract type that will result. According to 2 CFR Part 200.323, program operators must perform a cost or price analysis in connection with every procurement action in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold. This also includes contract modifications. The method and degree of analysis is based on the individual procurement, but as a starting point, the SFA must make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. This means that every procurement that's estimated to be over $30,000, including contract modifications, must include a cost estimate. Prior year cost records can be used to show the value of purchases for these products or services. USDA strongly recommends that the cost estimate be included in your solicitation. A statement can be included in your scope of services that in the prior year, the program spent X dollars for the goods and or services identified in this solicitation. When the value of the purchase is expected to exceed the $30,000 threshold, you can use one of the following: either a competitive sealed bid, which is also called an IFB or invitation to bid, or a competitive proposal, also commonly called a request for proposal or an RFP. Competitive sealed bidding procedures use an invitation for bid. The IFB is publicly solicited and a firm fixed price contract is awarded. There may be one contract awarded to the most responsive and responsible bidder that has the lowest overall price, or multiple awards may be made if the SFA states in the IFB that awards may be made to multiple bidders based on unit price by item or group of items. If you are going to award to more than one vendor, make sure you include this in the solicitation so that all prospective bidders will know. An IFB is used when there is a complete set of specifications of products and services. There are two or more responsible bidders willing to respond, and a firm fixed price is awarded. As we saw in the last slide, bids may be awarded based on a lump sum price to one bidder, a line item award based on the unit price that is awarded to multiple bidders, or a combination award to multiple bidders based on items that are grouped. The key is that bids are awarded to the responsible bidder whose bid, conforming with all the material terms and conditions of the invitation for bid, is the lowest in price. The IFB or sealed bid method is the preferred method when you have a complete and adequate specification of purchase description is available, and two or more responsible bidders are willing and able to compete effectively for your business. Now let's look at the competitive proposal or RFP. This type of proposal describes how technical and cost factors will be considered in making the final determination for purchase of goods and services. It results in the award of either a fixed price contract or a cost reimbursable contract. Competitive proposals are conducted with more than one source submitting an offer. It is generally used when conditions are not appropriate for the use of sealed bids. If you use this method, though, there are requirements that apply. When using an RFP, proposals must be solicited from an adequate number of qualified sources, and the SFA must have a written method for conducting the technical evaluations of the proposals received and for selecting the recipient. Contracts must be awarded to the responsible firm whose proposal is most advantageous to the program, with price and the other factors considered. The SFA may use an RFP for qualifications-based procurements of professional services, where the competitor's qualifications are evaluated and the most qualified competitor is selected. Examples where an RFP would be appropriate are pest control services, consulting services, and commodity processing. Let's make sure we discuss the provisions, and I want you to make sure that as you do your formal procurements that you have included all of these provisions in your solicitation. First is the Buy American provision, which is required for fixed price contracts and cost reimbursable contracts. The Buy American provision requires SFAs to purchase domestic commodity products. These products must be produced and processed in the United States using agricultural commodities that are also produced in the United States. In other words, SFAs are required to purchase to the maximum extent possible domestic commodities or products. The state agency requires that all procurements involving the purchase of agricultural products must include the Buy American certification form in the procurement document. Each vendor must include the completed Buy American certification form along with their bid. A bid that does not include the form, the completed form, should be considered non-responsive. By completing and signing the Buy American form, the vendor is certifying that a product is not produced or manufactured in the U.S. in sufficient and reasonable available quantities of satisfactory quality, or the vendor has provided sufficient documentation for the SFA to determine whether or not the cost of the U.S. product is significantly higher than the non-domestic product. Please keep in mind that in order for a vendor to claim one of these exceptions for a product, they must be able to prove that the product falls under one of the exceptions. The SFA must also sign the Buy American certification form. Before signing, the SFA must research the items the vendor is proposing to use that are not domestic to determine if the claim is accurate. One way of researching is to use the Agricultural Marketing Service website. The website provides guidance to the SFA in determining if domestic products are available. The downside to using this website is that the information being provided includes only the information available for today. In the snapshot on this slide, we are looking to see if domestic peaches are available. As of today, no domestic peaches are available in the Dallas terminal market. Only peaches from Chile are available. Many fresh items are seasonally available in the United States. You can require the vendor to use a non-domestic product only if it is out of season in the U.S. The USDA Foods Available list can also be used to assist in determining whether food items are available domestically, because USDA purchases only domestically grown products. And according to the Buy American provision, the creditable food component is the agricultural commodity. Food items that are not a meal component do not need to be domestic. An example would be spices. They are not a food component. Foods from Guam, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands are considered to be domestic. One additional piece to note before moving to the award process is the geographic preference that's found in 7 CFR Part 210.21G. Geographic preference is an additional scoring or evaluation criteria that may be used to provide a preference for the purchase of a locally raised agricultural product. So in accordance with 7 CFR 210, a school food authority participating in the child nutrition program may apply a geographic preference when procuring unprocessed, locally grown, or locally raised agricultural products. USDA does not, however, provide a definition of local. It's up to the SFA to determine what is going to be considered local. 2 CFR 200 does not allow geographic preference in the valuation of bids or proposals except for unprocessed, locally grown, or locally raised agricultural products. The link at the bottom of this slide talks about applying geographic preference in the Farm to School webinar titled Finding, Buying, and Serving Local Foods Using Geographic Preference. To be considered an unprocessed, locally grown, or raised agricultural product, the product must retain its inherent character. 7 CFR 210.21 provides specifics as to food handling and preservation techniques that do not change the character of a product. Some examples are cooling, freezing, peeling, slicing, dicing, washing, packaging, butchering, cleaning, and the pasteurization of milk. Flavoring of milk is not included, so geographic preference cannot be used when awarding a bid for flavored milk. I think everybody tends to get stuck on writing product specifications because they are both time-consuming and challenging. Writing detailed specifications allows the vendors to bid on like products and allows the SFA to receive the product that they desire. There is some key information that should be included in your specifications. The first step in writing product specifications is to name the product. Be specific so as to assist the vendor with understanding the product you want. Make sure you have researched quality indicators of the product. You also may want to obtain samples and taste test the product before adding it to your solicitation. Make sure you include or equal or pre-approved equal to any specification that states a brand name. In addition to the name of the product, include a code number if applicable, the pack size, the case pack, and weight. How do you want the item packaged and how big are the cases? Include the maximum weight or specific weight if desired. To avoid injuries from lifting heavy items, you may want to state that a case should not exceed X number of pounds. Some other descriptions might be that the product should be individually wrapped or there should be 72 to a case. You may want to include a minimum and maximum size of the piece or portion. An example of this would be a minimum of 3.9 ounces and a maximum of 4.1 ounces. Be careful when giving minimum and maximum serving sizes because it can skew your portion size cost. You may want to include the main ingredient or ingredients of a product. An example might be a bean burrito where the main ingredient desired is pinto beans or black beans or whole grain tortilla. The description should include other product ingredients that you desire. What about prohibited ingredients? If so, if you have prohibited ingredients, you may want to include those. Some examples might be that the product can't contain MSG, pork, fish byproducts, soy, or food coloring. What are the nutritional standards for this product? Is there a minimum or maximum number of calories, saturated fat, and or sodium that you want? Does the specification state that there can be no trans fat? Some additional descriptions might include that the product has to have a CN label, or that the product must meet specific crediting requirements, such as must equal a 1.5 ounce equivalent for the grain component. How will the SFA determine which company is offering the best price for a product? How will the unit price be determined for a product? One might include a description such as by the case, by the serving, or by the pound. What are some quality indicators that you need? For example, salad dressing cannot be called mayonnaise, and non-dairy frozen yogurt cannot be called ice cream. If the product is an agricultural product, the description should state that this product must meet USDA's Buy American provision requirements. This is an example of a detailed product description. The SFA wants an unbaked, frozen, lower sodium biscuit. The product must be made with enriched flour. The biscuit has to be at least 2.2 ounces by weight. Each serving has to be no more than 225 calories, 20 grams of fat, 5 grams of saturated fat, and 0 grams of trans fat. And there can be no more than 400 milligrams of sodium. Each biscuit must credit as 2 ounce equivalent of grain in the child nutrition program. Since flour is an agricultural product, the biscuit must meet USDA's Buy American provision requirements. Let's talk a little bit about electronic bidding. Revised statute 2212.1 requires that all public schools shall provide vendors the option to submit bids through a uniform and secure electronic interactive system. Any special condition or requirement for the submission must be specified in the advertisement for bids. When using a fixed price contract, the bids are received sealed and they're held sealed until the date and time of the bid opening. The bids are opened during the public bid opening and are read aloud to all participants. A firm fixed price contract award is made in writing to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Where specified in the bid documents, factors such as discounts, transportation costs, life cycle costs must be considered in determining which bid is lowest. Payment discounts can only be used to determine low bid when prior experience indicates that such discounts are usually taken advantage of. If you're using a cost reimbursable contract, they also must be received sealed. Since the cost reimbursable contract has two parts, the technical requirement and the price, you do not have to have a public bid opening. The evaluation of a cost reimbursable contract includes reviewing the best technical responses according to the evaluation criteria and scoring it as stated in the solicitation. The SFA must provide detailed explanations for each evaluation score and must be able to defend this to the state agency and or USDA. The second part of the evaluation is a review of price. Price must be a prime consideration in scoring. For competitive proposals or RFPs, you must first identify all the evaluation factors and their relative importance in the solicitation. This means how will each factor be scored and what specifically warrants one score from another. Evaluators must be knowledgeable in the areas being reviewed, as well as being knowledgeable in the scoring process. Again, the SFA must provide detailed documentation for scoring. The state agency or USDA should be able to review each of the bid documents and come up with the same score as the SFA. If that can't be done, the SFA is not being specific enough with their scoring criteria. Once evaluated, a contract may be awarded and the contract executed. This could be an official signing with a contract meeting that includes providing clarification and expectations to the prospective vendor, as well as to answer vendor questions. Always remember, if your contracts are for an FSMC, they all require prior approval by the state agency before executing the contract. The SFA may reject any and all bids for just cause. You must maintain your documentation of repeated failures of the vendor despite repeated communication with the vendor. Do not send a bid request to a vendor that you do not consider to be both responsible and responsive. Managing the contract is the real work. The work is not complete just because the solicitation, evaluation, and contract award has occurred. In accordance with 2 CF Part 200, the SFA must maintain oversight to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contract. One of the first functions in managing the contract is determining that you have received the required certificates: the independent price determination certificate, the suspension and debarment certificate, and the lobbying certificate. Some examples of managing the contract is ensuring that the solicitation and contract match. The SFA should make sure that the description and price of products and/or services match the item description and price in the bid document. There should be written communication with the vendor when products are delivered that do not match the bid requirements. Remember that if you accept a product that has not been bid, that it is an unallowable cost. If the SFA contracts with an FSMC and participation in an advisory committee is required, is a representative from the FSMC participating? And are they following through with requests from the SFA, students, parents, and other stakeholders? Has the Buy American documentation been provided by the vendor? And is the SFA receiving the domestic products that were bid? Is the company requesting substitutions for items prior to sending if the U.S. products are not available? Is the company requesting substitutions of other products before sending them? And are they providing those products at the bid price? Notice that this is a continual cycle. The cycle does not end until the contract ends. For managing processing contracts, there are specific requirements. You must complete a reconciliation of the amounts of USDA products sent to the processor and the amount of product received by the SFA from the processor. The bid price must be correctly reflected on each delivery ticket or invoice, and the SFA must continually monitor the processor's performance. Did you check the SAM.GOV website to be sure that the vendor you have chosen has not been disbarred? The company that you choose must be active in SAMs in order to contract with an SFA. The vendor should be notified by telephone and email anytime they fail to deliver in accordance with the contract. The notification should indicate how the problem needs to be corrected. The SFA must maintain records of the dates and information discussed. If the problem is not resolved the SFA must give the vendor written notification of the problem, indicating that immediate corrective action is expected and that failure to do so would be considered a breach of contract and could result in the cancellation of the contract. If cancellation of the contract becomes necessary, the SFA must provide written notice of the proposed action to the vendor. Reasons for the proposed action must be included. Even if the contract is not canceled, the SFA may disqualify the vendor from future bidding due to poor performance. The state agency strongly advises the SFA to include language in the bid document that includes the steps that will be taken when a vendor repeatedly fails to deliver according to the contract. A bidder disqualified for lack of responsibility must be notified in writing and given an opportunity for a hearing. If the SFA is rejecting a bid because of unresponsiveness, the bidder must be informed of why the bid was rejected. Let's talk a little bit about piggybacking. If the SFA plans to allow piggybacking, the original solicitation and contract must state that piggybacking is allowed. The original contract must also indicate either how many SFAs are allowed to piggyback or a dollar value that will be allowed. The piggybacking SFA must have all of the required documentation to use the contract. Some of the documents that must be obtained are the original cost price analysis, a copy of the public advertisement, the scoring of the original contract to ensure that the solicitation was awarded with price as the primary factor. You can refer to memo SFS 1879 for the list of documents that the piggybacking SFA must obtain for the original solicitation. It's often very difficult to obtain some of these documents, but if you are unable to obtain them all, then you cannot use the contract. There are also state regulations where it comes to piggybacking. The state regulations allow SFAs to piggyback within 1 year of the opening of a bid, provided that the following conditions are met. The contract was bid in compliance with revised statute 38.2211. The total purchases will not exceed 2 times what was purchased by the original person bidding the contract. This could conflict with the material change provision, so the SFA must determine which is stricter. Remember that a material change means that the piggybacking agency's purchases cannot exceed the small purchase threshold, which is $30,000. The piggybacking SFA must also do a cost price analysis before making the decision to piggyback off an existing contract to determine if the contract prices are reasonable. So the SFA needs to ask the question, could I obtain better pricing by bidding this myself? All formal bids must include these provisions from Appendix 2 of 2 CFR Part 200. The bid must include the administrative, contractual, or legal remedies the SFA plans to take if the vendor breaches the contract. It must include language concerning termination for cause and convenience. The sample procurement plan has some sample language that can be used. The equal opportunity provision must be included in the bid. And the Davis-Bacon Act is only applicable if the contract is for construction. Appendix 2 to CFR 200 also requires the following provisions: contract work hours and safety standards, rights to inventions, the Clean Air Act and Federal Water Pollution Control Act, debarment and suspension, and the Byrd Anti-Lobbying Amendment and Certificate. Also required is the contract work hours and safety standards, rights to inventions, debarment and suspension, and the Byrd Anti-Lobbying Amendment and Certificate. Must include the required civil rights laws, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendment of 1972, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Age Discrimination Act, and Title VII CFR Parts 15, 15A, and 15B, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and FNS Instruction 113-1, Civil Rights Compliance and Enforcement in School Nutrition Programs. All right, now we're going to move on to the procurement of equipment. Much like the purchase of other goods and services, the estimated dollar amount of the equipment purchase will determine the procurement process that must be followed. I will begin with the definition of equipment, then we'll follow with an explanation of the steps for procuring equipment in accordance with federal, state, and local regulations. Additionally, we'll discuss how to obtain the required documentation to ensure that the equipment purchase is both an allowable purchase with CMP funds and the correct procurement method is utilized and documented. Using these methods will ensure preparation for child nutrition program and other financial audits. OMB guidance and USDA regulations define equipment as any item of non-expendable personal property with the useful life of a year or longer and an acquisition cost which equals or exceeds the federal per unit capitalization threshold of $5,000 or a lower threshold set by state or local level regulations. Therefore, if you have an equipment purchase that is expected to be $5,000 or more, state agency approval must be in place prior to purchasing the item. The state agency approval process will be discussed in more detail as we go through the step-by-step process for procuring equipment. The first step in determining the requirements to properly purchase and document an approved equipment purchase is to conduct an assessment of the equipment needs for your schools. Next, you will estimate the cost of each piece of equipment listed, add all equipment costs together, and conduct a cost price analysis to determine which procurement method, formal or informal, must be used to procure. In order to estimate the cost of each piece of equipment, you may look at prior year cost records, or you can look online for estimated prices. As a CMP director, you should ask the following questions. What equipment do I need to purchase for a period of time? Is only one piece of equipment needed, or do I need several pieces of equipment to continue operations? If several pieces of equipment need to be purchased, it is required that directors calculate the aggregate value. The aggregate value of the equipment is calculated by simply adding the total expected cost for purchasing several pieces of equipment at one time. It is important to note that SFAs are prohibited from breaking larger purchases into smaller purchases in order to circumvent the procurement requirements for the small purchase method or formal purchase methods. In other words, SFAs are not allowed to take a shortcut and purchase one piece of equipment at a time to use an easier method of procurement. Taking a shortcut or circumventing the procurement requirements will result in an unallowable cost to the child nutrition program account that, upon audit, must be paid back to the federal nonprofit CMP account. If only one piece of equipment needs to be purchased, possibly in the instance where a steamer is broken beyond repair, then the price of that steamer alone would be used to determine the procurement method and whether state agency approval is needed for that purchase. The next question to ask is, what is the per unit cost of the equipment I'm planning to purchase? If any equipment item or multiple pieces of like kind equipment is estimated to cost $5,000 or more, the equipment pre-approval form must be obtained by the state agency and approval must be received prior to using CMP funds to pay for the equipment. An example of multiple pieces of like kind equipment would be cafeteria tables that may not be $5,000 or more per unit. However, when 15 are ordered, the aggregate cost is likely over $5,000, which requires the state agency pre-approval prior to purchase. As we said, SFAs must obtain prior written approval before incurring the cost of a capital expense. The OMB guidance on equipment and other capital expenditures requires SFAs to obtain prior written approval from the state agency before incurring the cost of a capital expenditure. Both the OMB guidance and generally accepted accounting principles identify equipment as a capital asset. This brings us to the next step in the procurement of equipment. CMP operators should ask the following question to determine if prior approval from the state agency is required in order to purchase equipment with CMP funds. Is the equipment cost estimated to be $5,000 or more? If the answer is yes, then state agency pre-approval for using CMP funds to purchase the piece of equipment must be obtained. There are two ways to obtain documentation of approval to maintain for your procurement records. First is by referencing the Louisiana State Agency Equipment Pre-Approval List, which is posted under the memo section for the CMP website as memo SFS 21-87. This memo is linked in the next slide so you can access it easy. The types of equipment included on the state agency pre-approved list are automatically pre-approved by the state agency as an allowable purchase for CMP operations. Keep this memo on file along with the procurement records to prove that the equipment purchase was allowable and that no further state agency approval was required for this purchase. Second, if the equipment is not listed on the pre-approved list, CMP operators should fill out the Louisiana Equipment Purchase Pre-Approval form that is linked on this slide and send it to the email address at childnutritionprograms.gov. Another way to access this form is on the CMP website under the form section. Keep in mind that SFAs must follow all applicable federal, state, and/or local procurement procedures when making these equipment purchases. This pre-approval does not exempt the SFA from using all applicable procurement procedures. For equipment purchases that are less than $5,000, refer to allowable and unallowable cost regulations. Expenditures for equipment using CMP funds must be reasonable, allowable, and allocable. Also ensure that the equipment meets industry standards for quantity food service use. This is a copy of the most recent state agency pre-approved equipment list. It's under memo SFS 21-87. It was posted in February of 2021 and replaces the original list that was posted in October of 2017. Recently, the state agency submitted additional equipment items for USDA to approve as part of the state agency pre-approved equipment list. This slide shows the latest equipment items approved by USDA, but be aware that this list is subject to change and the most current list must be used for pre-approval of purchases. USDA allowed certain types of additional equipment to be added to the list. but not all of what was requested by the state agency was approved. Please review the list for several added items that are now pre-approved for purchase with nonprofit federal program funds. A link to the revised list is also included. 2 CFR 200.439 emphasizes that construction and other improvements to land, buildings, or equipment is unallowable when applied as an expense to the CMP fund. When reviewing requirements for equipment pre-approval and completing the pre-approval form, keep in mind that under 2 CFR 200, construction and other improvements to land, buildings, or equipment are unallowable costs for the nonprofit child nutrition fund. There are limited exceptions. However, the state agency would have to review and approve such expenditures, which would involve an itemized review of planned expenditures. For reference to this regulation, please review the link on this slide. This brings us to the reason why USDA denied the request of the state agent to add certain equipment items to the pre-approved list. For example, we requested walk-in refrigerators and freezers to be added, both in 2018 and then again in 2021. However, this request was denied both times by USDA because this type of equipment typically involves construction or building alteration, and construction is not an allowable expense. So the purchase requires vetting or review by the state agency to ensure that the construction portion is not charged to the child nutrition program. For that item and any other item that is not on the list, the state agency equipment pre-approval form must be submitted and approved prior to purchase using CMP funds. When an item is not on the pre-approved equipment list, the state agency's prior review of the pre-approval form must provide reasonable assurance that the asset's acquisition cost is necessary for the program and that the nonprofit food service account can absorb this cost. This is why the form requires a justification of why the equipment cost is reasonable, necessary, and allocable for the operation of school food service and why the CMP account balance is requested. If the equipment is to be used by more than one department, covering 100% of the cost of the equipment is not allowable. However, a partial payment may be approved if the cost is divided equitably amongst departments based on usage. When requested by the state agency, USDA did not allow the addition of ice machines or hot water heaters to the pre-approved list because they are often used for programs outside of the child nutrition program. This does not mean that these items cannot be purchased with child nutrition funds. However, the state agency is required to approve the justification supporting exclusive use by the CMP program prior to purchase. In the case the equipment is used by child nutrition and other departments, a portion of usage may be justified for partial payment with CMP funds. Cafeteria tables and chairs were removed by USDA from the original pre-approved equipment list. USDA advised that cafeteria tables and chairs are rarely used strictly for child nutrition program meal service. Therefore, in most cases, child nutrition funds will not be allowed to bear the entire expense. SFAs will need to determine and justify the percentage of use that is for meal service and submit a state agency equipment pre-approval form requesting that CMP bear that partial percentage of the cost. In light of the factors reviewed, consider the following questions when filling out the equipment pre-approval form. What respective portion of the equipment will be used solely for CMP operations? Will this piece of equipment be used by other departments? If so, how will the cost be assigned equitably among the departments that use it? And what portion should be funded with CMP funds? Does the Child Nutrition Program account have the funds available to absorb the cost of the equipment in light of ongoing operational expenditures? It's important to emphasize that the justification submitted in the state agency pre-approval form must illustrate that only the respective portion of equipment that is used solely for CMP operations is funded using nonprofit CMP funds. The fourth and last step in the process of procuring equipment is determining the winning bidder and award for the purchases. Remember to maintain procurement documentation on file along with your state agency pre-approval for equipment purchases in accordance with record retention regulations. And as it covered in the previous section on general procurement guidelines, be sure that you award to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder, ensuring specifications for equipment, excluding construction, and other requirements included in the bid are met. Also remember that if the SFA plans to award each type of equipment to the lowest bidder, that must be stated in the original solicitation. As an overview to equipment procurement, please be aware of the following do's and do nots. Conduct a periodic needs assessment to purchase all equipment needed for CMP operations for a given period of time, district-wide. This improves your chances of receiving the most competitive prices by enhancing competition. Make sure you obtain state agency approval prior to purchasing the equipment valued at $5,000 or more. Determine the local requirements and thresholds for the type of procurement to be conducted at the LEA level. Obtain school board approval if required prior to purchasing equipment. Make sure that you're following all applicable federal, state, and/or local procurement procedures. Document and maintain equipment pre-approval and procurement on file for 3 years plus the current year. Use, manage, and dispose of equipment acquired under a federal award by the state in accordance with all state laws and procedures. Do not purchase equipment one piece at a time or divide purchases in order to avoid or circumvent formal procurement requirements. Please feel free to contact the Division of Nutrition Support if you have further questions or need clarification. Please be sure to complete the survey following the presentation. The state agency uses these surveys to adjust or clarify training topics based on your feedback. We're going to take a minute so I can take a breather and see if we can answer some of these questions. So I'm going to mute. Okay, the first question is, can you repeat the use or non-use of geographic preference in a milk bid? You can use geographic preference for white milk. However, flavoring of milk is not considered it maintaining its inherent character. So you would have to do a bid separately for white milk and flavored milk, because you could use the geographic preference for white milk, but not for flavored milk. The second question is, if you have a vendor that, one, has not honored the contract, and two, you are in the process of documenting and disqualifying the vendor, do you have to send a bid if they request a copy of the bid? If you have not disqualified this particular vendor and you are in the process of doing it, you would have to send them a bid if they requested it. Next question, how does piggybacking work with tip contract? It works the same way as piggybacking off of any other contract. If you go and look at memo 18-79, you must be able to obtain and maintain everything that's on that list for the original solicitation. And I can tell you from experience that it's very difficult to get things like the original public advertisement from an original contract. So, but you must maintain that on file in order to use anyone else's contract. We've done that. We've obtained all of the information for a couple of contracts, but it's like pulling teeth to get all of the information for them. What if you are satisfying a grant and have to purchase equipment being purchased outside of a grant? So I'm assuming that this question is asking if you have two equipment purchases to make. One is a needs-based purchase and the other is an equipment grant purchase. How would you handle that? You could pull those together into, and should pull those together in one invitation for bid, and pay for it with two separate funds. You would not want to separate that if you're purchasing them at the same time. Can you disqualify a vendor if they don't sell pouch milk? You would not disqualify them, but they would be considered a non-responsive bidder because they're not providing the item that you are asking for. So it's not a matter of disqualifying them, but they would not, if they can't bid on pouch milk and that's what you want, then they would be considered a non-responsive bidder. If my items were approved as a part of a spend down plan, what else is needed? The spend down plan is separate from the pre-approval. So even though you completed a spend down plan, when you get ready to purchase pieces of equipment, you would still need to use the pre-approved form for the equipment before you purchase the equipment. Just want to remind you that we do have an evaluation on the website at Pennington to complete for confirmation of attendance. You go back into the registration and under trainings to the date of this training, and it should give you the survey link. That's all of the questions that we have. Oh, and Kathy's telling us go to the calendar. So if that's all the questions that we have, we wish you a very good day and a very good week. If you have any additional questions, make sure you give us a call. Thank you.